So just how big of a mess is this Saudi Arabia fiasco, and what should we do to get out of it? I'm joined by Shuvaloy Majumder, Monk Senior Fellow in Foreign Policy for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and a former Director of Policy for one of Canada's previous Foreign Affairs Ministers. Welcome to the program, Shuvaloy.
Great to be here. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Great to have you here. So what do you make of this fiasco from the get-go? Let's kind of lay the terrain here.
Sure.
Was this a mistake? Chrystia Freeland and one of her sort of departmental Twitter accounts saying, we're upset with Saudi Arabia, they've arrested Samar Badawi, and as well they still have Raif Badawi, whose wife and children are Canadian citizens. So Trudeau says, we got to make Canada back on the world stage, we got to stand up for human rights. Were they doing the right thing here, even though Saudi Arabia has now effectively severed all ties?
Oh, and walking back all existing ties, looking to liquidate any commercial presence in Canada in its entirety. I think this is part of a longer story that we're seeing that this government seems to be having a challenge with. Whether it's India or China and today Saudi Arabia, it seems to be having a very difficult time finding its footing in engaging these emerging powers that will be reshaping the world order to come in significant ways. And each of these countries require a very significant response. And so when we talk about Saudi Arabia, I think we have to go beyond just what we know about it from typical headlines over the last decades. In the last 2 years, the country has been pursuing massive economic and societal reform under the vision called 2030. And this vision understands that Saudi Arabia is at the crossroads. It's facing an existential crisis, asking itself serious questions about what will it do beyond the post-oil economy, what will it do with the traditional elements of society, its extremists, and how does it really modernize its people, particularly to participate in the global economy to come. So over the course of these last 2 years, not only is the kingdom trying to undertake massive tectonic reform, it also is living in a very dangerous neighborhood, mostly made unstable by the autocracy of Tehran. Tehran has been arming and equipping the Houthis with drones and missiles that are landing in Saudi cities. This is a G20 partner. They've been fomenting terror in Iraq, in Syria, and elsewhere. They're not interested in building a stable Middle East, these Iranian regime types. They're interested in creating instability and trying to rival Saudi Arabia at every step of the way.
But the question, does that mean then that we should kind of shy away with being publicly critical in a very minor way? We're just talking about a couple tweets
Not
here
at all.
against Saudi Arabia, you know, our enemy's enemy is our friend sort of thing, if I can put it that way, or should we just factor all of this in? I mean, how much of a misstep was it? So on Wednesday, the Prime Minister said a kind of shorter version of what you just said when he was asked about it, and the fact that they're liquidating almost all of their assets and investment here in Canada. Trudeau said, well, they have been making great strides in their human rights and so forth, or some strides. Do you see that as a bit of an apology, a bit of a walk back from those tweets?
I do, and I think it's a recognition of the kind of context that we've been just discussing in Saudi Arabia. Over the last 2 years, they've been doing massive reforms domestically and living in a very challenged neighborhood in their own region. And what that requires is global support. And Canada has been quite quiet over the last 2 years when it comes to the kinds of things that the kingdom has been taking on, the challenges in the region. The Canadian government is known to be trying to accommodate Tehran rather than hold it accountable. And so a lot of the kind of issues that we're seeing is a build-up over time upon which the latest tweet that Minister Freeland issued was probably a bridge too far, insisting on the immediate release without due process or an acknowledgement of the rule of law that the kingdom is trying to establish for itself. And then compounded by issuing it in Arabic in domestic media. Remember, Saudi Arabia, while I wouldn't call it the most free country in the world by a stretch, does have Twitter and Facebook and Google, unlike Iran, and struggles to find a balance between embracing pluralism and encouraging reform.
But Shuvaloy, let's be honest here. I mean, 2 little tweets here. It wasn't all that much. There probably would have been nothing else. It would have just been one of those things, oh, today we're upset at the arrest of this person, we're doing our tweets. Surely there's something else going on here. Isn't this Saudi Arabia actually just trying to nix sort of all criticism of their human rights record, making it clear to other countries, we're making an example out of Canada?
You know, that could be a part of it. It's hard to interpret what's going on in the halls of the palace in Riyadh today in terms of whether or not Canada is trying to be singled out as an example. But I can't imagine that this is so impulsive that it is over a tweet alone. I think it's a comment about the wider relationship, which the government of Canada has not been focusing on building up the way that it could have been over the last 2 years. I think it's important to see the world as it is, not as we wish it were. And part of the reality is that Saudi Arabia is experiencing massive reform, affecting the lives of millions of its people, including its women. And while I would say that the project is largely imperfect still, the ambition is laudable and deserves friends and allies to support them. And we should be treating them in some regard in that capacity. There's a way in which, if you really care about helping the Badawis, or if you really care about getting people who are human rights activists the kind of attention they deserve so that they can go through the process and survive it, there's a sophisticated approach that needs to be applied in a place like Saudi Arabia, and I think the government misstepped on that.
Chrystia Freeland said she did that as well, though. She's done this through back channels. So
Sure.
Can you do both?
Yes, well, this government, previous governments with Saudi Arabia, doesn't shy from talking about the values of human freedom. It has to be done in a way that's as heard as it is important as we say it. And I think if you're not being heard because you're being seen to try and be disruptive inside the kingdom during a very delicate time, then obviously you're not going to get the kind of audience, or more specifically the kind of action you're trying to strive for the people for whom it matters the most.
All right, Shubham Majumdar, thanks very much for joining us with your insights.
Good being here.
We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and send us your comments on Facebook and Twitter.